All right, guys, so this is day 2 of our microbiology labs from the Carolina kit. And today we are going to start with the first one is aseptic technique. And activity 1 of aseptic technique, you have already completed. You completed that when you made your broth cultures yesterday on day 1. So here's our Serratia culture. You can see that it's very turbid or cloudy, so it's certainly ready to use. And today we are going to transfer, using aseptic technique, we are going to transfer that Serratia into a broth, a nutrient agar slant, and onto a Petri dish. So the first step always is we're going to clean our surface with a little bit of bleach, over that, and wipe it off. And then I would next recommend that we label everything before we begin. So I'm going to take my test tubes and I'm just going to label them Serratia marcensis. And I'm going to label it with the date, which today is the 12th. And I'm going to label all my tubes. First, you can label them right on the glass, or if you'd rather, you can label them on the printed label itself, depending on how small you write. And I'm also going to label a Petri dish. I'm going to get a Petri dish out of my container here. You want to, when you unwrap these, you want to just encourage one dish to come to the surface and not contaminate by touching anything inside the bag. This dish is already contaminated. It has a big mold colony on it, so I won't be using this one. I'm going to put that one aside, and I'm going to get a second one out of my container, and this one is clean. So these Petri dishes, we want to label them always on the bottom where the media is growing. The lid is slightly loose and the food is down here. The food is sort of the consistency of Jell-O, so we want to not press very hard with our loops, or we will basically just gouge right into the food. And again, I'm labeling it with the name of the bacteria, my initials, and the date. Notice how I've written around the sides. I don't want to write right through because I want to be able to see in the middle of the plate so I can make my observations. Then I'm actually going to leave the dish inverted upside down on the lid. I'm just going to put that aside for the moment. I don't wear gloves, but feel free to wear gloves if you would like to. I'm going to light my paraffin burner here with my grill lighter. You want to be sure that you keep this away from anything that's flammable. I did put some isopropanol that I purchased at the drugstore at Target actually in the other cup for disposing of the inoculating loops. So today we're at the transfer lab. We're going to do aseptic transfer. What that means, we're going to try not to touch or contaminate. We only want the bacteria that we're transferring. We only want that bacteria to end up into the media. So we have these bags full of inoculating loops. They look like little tiny bubble ones. And the object of the game is to get a single one of these out at a time. I've already used a few of these, so I'm just pressing down, pressing up from the bottom. I'm getting one inoculating loop tail close to where the Ziploc seal is. I'm going to open that Ziploc seal now and just very carefully kind of wiggle that one loop out, and I'm going to grab it. And then I'm immediately going to close off the rest of the loops. And this, I have to hold this loop. You can't put it down on any surfaces. So I'm going to reach into my Serratia test tube. We usually encourage students to work from the front to the back of the rack. So I have my Serratia tube right here. And behind that, I have the 2 test tubes that I'm going to be putting the bacteria into. So let's start with broth to broth because that's the simplest. I'm going to take my Serratia tube, hold it in my non-dominant hand. We want our loops to be fairly relaxed in our hands. We want to hold them like a pencil or a paintbrush. Don't need to grab onto them super tightly. And we remove the cap with the pinky of our dominant hand. So I have the loop in this hand and I'm just removing, notice how I'm turning the tube, not turning the cap. That keeps my eyes right on that loop, and I can be sure that I'm not accidentally putting bacteria anywhere it doesn't need to go. I'm going to flame the top of this test tube very gently in my paraffin burner here. And then I'm going to try to put my inoculating loop into the test tube without touching the sides of the vial. And I want to just go down, dip, and come right back out again without touching the sides. That's going to give me a full loop full of bacteria, which is usually about 10 microliters, I think. And I'm going to flame this top. And now I'm going to put the cap back on. And notice again, I'm twisting the tube, not my hand. Put my Serratia tube down. I'm picking up one of the nutrient broth tubes. Again, I already labeled it. It's warm. It's been out for about 15 minutes. And with my pinky, I'm removing the cap. You may not put that cap down on the surface, on the counter. It has to stay in your hand. And into this tube, it was sterile when I received it, so I don't think there's any bacteria there, but just as a double check, I'm gonna real quickly flame the top of that tube. And again, without touching the sides of the vial, I'm gonna insert my loop, and then we usually give it a little tap, tap, tap like that. I'm gonna remove it, flame. Now this loop has bacteria all over it from the transfer, broth to broth. Moving the broth to the back of the rack. I cannot flame it because it's plastic. If we were in class, this would be a metal loop and we would flame it. So I'm going to just put it immediately into the isopropanol cup that I have here, and that is going to disinfect that loop. I'm going to leave it sit there for about 20 minutes to a half an hour after I'm finished. So now I'm going to do the second transfer, which is that same Serratia broth that you made yesterday into a nutrient agar slant. And I want to show you this up close. Can you see how down here at the end, we call this the butt of the tube. There's this, the media is a lot thicker than it is up here at the top. And I'm holding the slant so you can see the slant portion, but now I'm tipping it so you can look at the whole area to inoculate. We use these slants primarily to do subcultures of bacteria. Grow smaller amounts. They last for a little bit longer than a broth culture. The broth cultures we would use to grow lots of bacteria in a short time, and also for transport bacteria from place to place. So this slant, I'm going to want to put the bacteria on this slant, and I'm going to use a zigzag motion. They call it the fishtail. So like a little swimmy motion on that tube. And I'll show you that when I get to it. So again, I have to manage to finagle a single loop out of my package. So I'm going to I kind of jingled them until I got one all by itself. I'm pinching the one that I'm going to extract. And now I'm going to open up my bag again. And I'm going to push that loop forward so that I don't put my fingers into the whole bag. And I'm going to grab it out. All right. Close it up. Now again, I'm going to take a loop full of my Serratia culture from yesterday, removing the cap with my pinky, flaming the top of the tube, inserting my loop without touching the sides, grabbing a nice big loop full, flaming the top again, replacing the cap. And again, remember, notice I'm turning the tube, not the cap. Then put this back in my rack, and I'm going to grab my slant. And I usually pre-loosen these, but I didn't do this one. So I'm unscrewing it. Again, turning the tube, not my hand. I'm going to flame the top. And then I'm going to turn this as I inoculate it so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to turn this is when it looks like a slant. I'm going to turn that surface. If I was doing it for real, I would turn it toward myself so I could see, but I can see in the screen. So I'm going to insert my loop very gently. I'm going all the way to the bottom of the tube, and then I'm just going to very gently lay it on that media and zigzag up to the top. Remove it, flame, twist the tube, not the cap, move that to the back of the rack. This loop is contaminated with bacteria, so I'm going to pop that into the alcohol container. And then our third transfer is we're going to transfer from broth to the Petri dish to the agar plate. Okay. We recommend that students, you always put the plates face down, put them on their lids, and I'll show you why in a second. It's a lot easier than to lift the whole plate than to just lift the lid at an angle as suggested in the videos by Carolina. So I'm going to shake, right? I'm going to shake one to the top here. I'm gonna grab it, get everyone else out of the way, open, and then encourage that one. I'm gonna put my fingers on that guy and push him out of the bag like this. And then I grab him, and everybody else stays nice and sterile. Oh, I touched my lab coat. All right, gotta get a different one. Let's try that again. All right, I have just one. And this time I'll hold it carefully so it doesn't touch my lab coat. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to take my loop. This one's a little bendy. Take my loop, and I'm going to go into my Serratia broth culture again that I made yesterday. I'm going to gently flame the top of that tube. I'm going to insert my loop, again, not touching the walls of the tube. I'm going to pick up a loop full in my little bubble wand here of bacteria, flame the top of the tube again, close the tube by turning the tube, not my hand, and I'm putting the culture back down in my rack. Now I'm going to pick up the Petri dish. Remember, it's on the lid is on the bottom of my counter here. I'm going to pick up the Petri dish, and I'm just very gently going to lay a big giant S shape from the top to the bottom. I'm going to close the lid. This loop still has bacteria on it. Pop that into the alcohol bath and set that aside. And then we will look at these results tomorrow. Okay, and we will take pictures of them and answer some questions.